What's going on? It's your boy H Money, Mr. The Zone. We in the building. Let's get it. Terence Crawford versus Josh Taylor is a better fight than Manny Pacquiao versus Errol Spence. And I'm going to tell you why. Terence Crawford, who's in his prime, number one pound for pound. Most people got Terence Crawford number one pound for pound or Canelo Alvarez. One of the two. But Terence Crawford, number one pound for pound. You know what I mean? Former undisputed champion. 3-division world champion. 2-time lineal world champion, Terence Bud Crawford. Undefeated. Pound for pound, the best fighter in the world versus Josh Taylor, who's undisputed. Undisputed champion at 140 pounds. Josh Taylor coming off his biggest victory against Jose Ramirez. Josh Taylor, he looked phenomenal in that fight. Josh Taylor dominated Jose Ramirez. Josh Taylor, he beat Regis Prograis. Josh Taylor, he won the World Boxing Super Series. You got to give Josh Taylor credit. Right now, Josh Taylor is pound for pound one of the best fighters in the world. So a matchup between Josh Taylor and Terence Crawford is a matchup of two undisputed champions. Terence Crawford was undisputed. Two fighters on the pound for pound list. Two fighters on the top 5 pound for pound. Josh Taylor, he's on my top 5 pound for pound list. He's an undisputed champion. Like I said, just look at his accolades. Undefeated. Josh Taylor. Just look at his resume. Regis Prograis, Victor Postal, Ivan Baranchyk, Jose Ramirez. He wiped out 140 pounds. Josh Taylor, he got nothing to prove at 140. He ready to fight Terence Crawford. That's what he wants to do. I think this is a big fight. MTK Global, Josh Taylor, you know what I mean? This makes for a big fight. Terence Crawford, he wants the big fights. A lot of these guys, they've been ducking Terence Crawford, man. They've been avoiding Terence Crawford, man. He's been avoided by a lot of guys, like Sean Porter, who was his mandatory, and Sean Porter ducked that fight. Sean Porter, he could have activated his mandatory, forced that fight with Terence Crawford and take it to purse bid, but he didn't do it. You know what I mean? So what? Terence Crawford, he needs a big fight. Terence Crawford, he just knocked out Kell Brook. You know what I mean? He's making it look easy. Knockout after knockout. So now we talking about Manny Pacquiao versus Errol Spence. Manny Pacquiao, we know Manny Pacquiao is an all-time great. We know Manny Pacquiao, 8-division world champion, 8 divisions. Nobody has ever done that. Manny Pacquiao is the only 8-division world champion in boxing. He's the only man to ever do that. So you got to give Manny Pacquiao his credit. He's a legend. He fought the best. He fought the top guys. He fought all the big fighters, all the best fighters in the world. You know what I mean? He fought Mayweather. He just beat Keith Thurman. Manny Pacquiao, he beat Eric Morales. He beat Juan Manuel Marquez. He beat Marco Antonio Barrera. Manny Pacquiao, he beat Miguel Cotto, Shane Mosley. Fighter after fighter, champion after champion, weight class after weight class. He's a legend. But at this point, Manny Pacquiao, bro, he hasn't fought in 2 years. Manny Pacquiao is 42 years old. Now, if you consider fighters like Linares as an old fighter, but Linares is 35. Manny Pacquiao, he's 42 years old. Manny Pacquiao, he's been knocked out a lot of times. Manny Pacquiao, he hasn't fought in over 2 years. You think about his age. At 42 years old, he hasn't fought a fight in 2 years. At this point, I'm telling you, Josh Taylor, at this point in their careers, Josh Taylor is a better fighter than Manny Pacquiao. At this point in his career, it's the truth. Josh Taylor, look at his last fights. Look what he's been doing. He just beat an undefeated fighter, Jose Ramirez, a unified champion, and dropped him 2 times. You know what I mean? I think Josh Taylor, At this point, Josh Taylor beat a lot of these welterweights. Josh Taylor will beat a lot of these welterweights, man. You know what I mean? I think Josh Taylor, he will beat Danny Garcia. He will beat Danny Garcia easily, man. Josh Taylor will beat Sean Porter. I'm telling you, Josh Taylor, he will beat Keith Thurman right now. I think Josh Taylor will beat Manny Pacquiao right now after watching his last fight. Josh Taylor is a top 5 fighter. Manny Pacquiao is 42 years old. You know what I mean? I think Errol Spence, this is a good fight for Errol Spence. Errol Spence, unified champion. I got to give the man his credit. He's undefeated. Errol Spence Jr., he's a top five fighter right now. Top 5 pound for pound, hands down. You got to give it to Errol Spence. He deserves it. He's a unified champion. He's been dominating. He's been looking good. He's been in, I would say, only one close fight, one controversial fight against Sean Porter, but he won that fight and he dropped Sean Porter. So you got to give the man his credit. So right now, Errol Spence Jr. is the favorite in that fight against Manny Pacquiao. Errol Spence Jr., he's going to beat Manny Pacquiao. He's too young. He's too strong. Pacquiao is too old, man. Spence going to beat him. So I think that's an easy fight for Errol Spence against a 42-year-old Manny Pacquiao. Errol Spence Jr., his fight, I would say he got a good fight right there. Al Heyman, PBC, they came up big, delivered for Errol Spence Jr. You know what I mean? He needed a big fight, and now that's what he got. But I'm telling you, a fight between Terence Crawford and Josh Taylor is a better fight, is a more competitive fight than Errol Spence Jr. and Manny Pacquiao. Remember, Manny Pacquiao, bro, Manny Pacquiao, like I said, man, he's been knocked out, man. He's been knocked out a couple of times. He's been knocked out. Manny Pacquiao, he's been beat. He got beat, man, even though he's a legend. He's a legend. But I'm telling you, at this point in his career, Manny Pacquiao is not the same fighter, man, at 42 years old, coming from a 2-year layoff. You know what I mean? But I'm excited about the fight. Hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel, man. Terence Crawford, pound for pound, one of the best fighters in the world. Undisputed. You know what I mean? I would love to see that fight. Terence Crawford versus Josh Taylor. That's a great fight, bro.